Contempt isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself in explosive arguments or obvious insults. Sometimes it shows up in whispers, in the way she ignores your input, the way she rolls her eyes when you speak, or the way she laughs at your vulnerability like it's weakness. It lives in the tone she uses when she talks down to you, as if you're less. It hides in the silence after you express something that matters to you, and she just shrugs it off like it didn't. That's the nature of contempt. It doesn't scream, it erodes. Slowly, quietly, and unless you recognize it, it becomes the background music of the relationship, playing on loop until you no longer notice how deeply it's affecting you. You start to adjust. You walk on eggshells to avoid triggering it. You become smaller in your own home. You stop sharing your thoughts because they're only met with smirks. You stop asking questions because you're tired of feeling like an inconvenience. You begin to second, guess your instincts. Was she just tired? Was it something I said? Maybe I'm overreacting, but deep down you feel it in the pit of your stomach. This isn't love anymore. This isn't partnership. This is slow death by disrespect. And yet, because you remember who she used to be, how she used to look at you, admire you, love you, you stay, you try harder, you compromise more, and in doing so, you lose pieces of yourself. That's the trap of contempt. It doesn't just kill the relationship, it kills the man within it. You stop standing tall. You stop leading with confidence. You become reactive instead of decisive. You start managing her emotions instead of your mission. Your identity becomes shaped around pleasing someone who no longer sees you as someone worth pleasing. She may not say it directly, but every action whispers the truth. You're not enough. And that message, repeated over time, seeps into your subconscious until you begin to believe it. But here's what most men don't realize. Contempt doesn't begin in her. It begins in what you tolerate. It grows in the silence of your self-abandonment. It thrives in the spaces where you once had standards, but now have excuses. The longer you ignore it, the more it cements itself as the new normal. She loses respect for you not just because of her own issues, but because you allow her to treat you in ways she knows you'd never accept from anyone else. She sees the contradiction. She sees the man who claims to be strong but acts weak in her presence. And nothing kills attraction faster than a man who betrays himself for the comfort of a woman who no longer respects him. To reclaim your place, you have to see contempt not as a test of your patience, but as a signal of war. A silent war against your value, your boundaries, your worth. And in war, the first rule is simple. Know your enemy. Don't dress it up as stress or hormones or a phase. Call it what it is. See it for what it does. Because until you name it, you can't change it. And if you keep tolerating it, you'll eventually become a stranger to yourself, resentful, bitter, emotionally exhausted, and still wondering why the woman beside you looks at you like she's already halfway out the door. She thrives on your energy, not in the way love does, not in a reciprocal, nurturing way, but in the way power dynamics do. Every time you try to prove yourself after she belittles you, every time you raise your voice to be heard, every time you lean in when she leans out, you're giving her the one thing that keeps her contempt alive: control. And control is addictive. The more she senses she can bend you, provoke you, manipulate you into reacting, the more she indulges in it. It becomes a drug, a high. She pushes, not because she wants to connect, but because she wants to see if you'll chase. And every time you do, she confirms what she already suspects. You value her more than you value yourself. When she treats you with contempt, and you still show up with affection, she doesn't see that as love. She sees that as weakness. When she disrespects you and you try to fix it with gifts, compliments, or desperate validation, she doesn't feel guilt. She feels power. You think your efforts are repairing the relationship, but what you're actually doing is reinforcing the imbalance. She disrespects, you pursue; she withdraws, you beg; she mocks, you explain. She knows exactly how to provoke a reaction, and once she realizes how easy it is, she loses respect for you in silence. Her words may stay measured, but her heart already sees you as a man she can control at will. This is how contempt festers, not in explosive fights, but in these tiny, quiet exchanges where you surrender your dignity for scraps of her attention. You give her the fuel, you let her feel superior. You continue to argue your worth instead of walking away with it intact. And it always starts with that one subtle moment. You let the first disrespect slide because you told yourself she was just stressed. You let the second slide because you didn't want to seem too sensitive. By the third, you're rationalizing her mockery. By the 10th, you're apologizing for feeling disrespected. And by the time you realize what's happened, you're no longer the man you once were. You've become reactive, insecure, afraid of losing someone who stopped admiring you long ago. You cannot defeat contempt by confronting it head-on with emotion. You can't win this by explaining your pain, pleading for compassion, or reasoning your way back into her heart. That's not how this game works. The more you try, the more contemptuous she becomes, because she knows your validation is still in her hands. So stop giving it. Withdraw the attention she's come to expect. Cut off the emotional supply. Make her feel the silence where your approval used to be. Show her that you're no longer emotionally available to be used as a sounding board for her superiority complex. When you go cold, not with bitterness, but with complete emotional indifference, something changes. She starts to sense that the man who once clung to her every word has shifted. You're no longer reacting. You're not explaining, you're simply not there, and that void becomes unsettling, because contempt only exists when it has something to consume. Without your reactions, without your desperate need to be understood, her games fall flat. Her power dissolves. She no longer feels dominant. She feels discarded. And that's when the regret begins to form, quietly, slowly, not in her words, but in her behavior. She starts reaching out more. She asks questions she never used to. She notices your absence like a mirror she can't turn away from. This is the dynamic reversal that most men never reach, because they're too busy trying to change her behavior instead of changing their own responses. Contempt is not conquered by confrontation. It dies from starvation. When you stop feeding her ego with your pain, when you stop validating her control with your neediness, when you stop participating in the emotional dance she's choreographed, she has no choice but to reevaluate your place in her life. And in many cases, she regrets the very contempt she once thought made her powerful. There comes a point in a man's life where he has to stop seeking transformation in her approval and start finding evolution in his own reflection. When a woman holds you in contempt, it's not always about what you've done. It's about who you've allowed yourself to become in her presence. Weak, submissive, directionless, and she can smell that from miles away. Contempt is her reaction to your collapse as a man, your decline into someone who no longer commands respect, no longer challenges her, no longer radiates masculine certainty. You stopped being the man she once admired, not because you changed, but because you forgot who you were in the first place. You got lost in her moods, you got soft in her drama, You traded your edge for comfort, and now you're wondering why she looks at you like you're invisible. The only way to reverse that is to stop reacting to her disrespect and start upgrading your life without explanation. Not for her, not to win her back, but because you refuse to live beneath your potential any longer. There's something profoundly attractive, almost hypnotic, about a man who is completely invested in himself, a man who builds his body, his income, his mindset, his purpose like it's the only thing that matters. Because when you shift your focus away from her validation and onto your own growth, you begin to disrupt the dynamic that gave birth to her contempt in the first place. She doesn't expect you to stop responding. She doesn't expect you to stop asking her what's wrong, stop chasing after her affection, stop accommodating every emotional storm she throws at you. But when you do, when you become still, unbothered and unavailable, everything changes. Suddenly, she's not in control anymore. She's not the emotional center of the relationship. She's not the sun that your world revolves around, and that disorients her. Because the moment you stop feeding her ego, the power flips. She begins to feel the distance, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. She watches you move differently. You're not clinging to your phone. You're not analyzing her silence. You're not begging for intimacy. You're not even trying to fix things. You're too busy building, too busy becoming dangerous again, too busy walking with that slow, deliberate confidence that says, "I no longer fear losing you." That's when regret begins to creep into her mind, not because of guilt, but because of contrast. She remembers who you used to be, before you dulled your edge, before you softened your fire, and now she sees who you are becoming, a man who could walk away and never look back, a man whose silence is louder than any argument, a man who doesn't chase, who doesn't plead, who doesn't play games, a man she may have once had, but no longer owns. That's what makes a woman question everything, because contempt cannot coexist with admiration. And admiration only returns when a man stops seeking her and starts becoming undeniable. You don't get there by talking. You don't get there by explaining your hurt or reminding her of the good times. You get there by walking into the storm of your own growth and refusing to come back the same. Hit the gym like you're sculpting war armor. Build your finances like your survival depends on it. Devour books, sharpen your mind, cut off distractions. Let your glow up be so silent and savage that the only time she hears your name is when someone else mentions how far you've come. Let her watch in confusion as the man she dismissed becomes the man she can't reach. That's not a tactic, that's transformation. And when a woman sees a man evolve beyond her reach, the same contempt that once fed her ego begins to rot in her stomach as regret. One of the most dangerous patterns a man can fall into is excusing a woman's disrespect because he's afraid to lose her. He tells himself she's just having a bad day. He convinces himself that maybe he's being too sensitive. He interprets her sarcasm as playfulness, her emotional distance as independence, her dismissiveness as stress. But deep down, he knows something's off. He feels it every time she makes a snide remark in front of others and laughs it off. He feels it when she cuts him off mid-sentence or invalidates his feelings without a second thought. Yet he bites his tongue, choosing peace over conflict, thinking that being understanding will bring her back to love, but that's not understanding, it's avoidance, it's self, betrayal in slow motion. Every time you excuse her contempt, you train her. You teach her that disrespecting you comes without consequences, that she can mock you, minimize you, neglect you, and you'll still stay. You'll still show up, still cater to her moods, still try to make her feel secure while you yourself are drowning. And over time, she stops seeing you as a man. She starts seeing you as a tool, someone who exists to make her feel powerful, not protected. Someone she can test, manipulate, and use as a mirror for her own superiority. She doesn't even have to think twice about how she treats you because she knows you'll take it. And what woman can truly respect a man who won't even protect himself from her? The truth is, most women don't feel safe with a man they can control. They may toy with him, keep him around, even sleep with him, but they don't admire him. They don't trust him with their vulnerability. They don't feel drawn to him in that raw, primal way that real respect creates. Because deep down they know a man who won't enforce his own boundaries can't possibly protect anything else. Not her, not the relationship, not even himself. And contempt grows in that vacuum where leadership is absent, where standards have collapsed, and where the man has forfeited his authority for emotional scraps. Holding her accountable doesn't mean yelling, threatening, or trying to dominate. That's not strength, it's insecurity in disguise. Real accountability is calm, clear, non-negotiable. It's the ability to say, "I will not accept being spoken to like that," and then walk away if it happens again. It's the strength to remove your presence from spaces where your dignity isn't honored. It's the clarity to let her deal with the discomfort of your absence when she's crossed the line. And yes, she will test you. She'll push back. She'll accuse you of being controlling, cold, or even insecure. But that's only because she's used to you folding. She's used to you caving in the face of her emotions. And when you don't, when you hold the line, that's when she's forced to see you differently. Sometimes she'll respect you more. Sometimes she'll try harder. Other times she'll leave. But the outcome doesn't matter nearly as much as the act of drawing that line in the first place. Because when you stop making excuses for her behavior and start holding her accountable for how she treats you, you're not just correcting her. You're healing yourself. You're sending a message to your own subconscious that you're worth respect. You're reprogramming yourself to never tolerate contempt again. Not just from her, but from anyone. That's the foundation of masculine integrity. The ability to protect your soul from slow erosion, even when the person hurting you is the one you love. And here's the part most men miss. If she does stay, if she does come back, she won't see the same man. She'll see a man with a spine, a man who values his peace more than her approval, a man who leads not with ego, but with unshakable standards. And even if she doesn't say it out loud, she'll feel it in her gut. This is a man I cannot play with anymore. This is a man I must respect, or lose completely. And once that realization settles in, the dynamic shifts. She begins to self-correct. She watches her tone. She weighs her words. She hesitates before crossing a line she once danced over freely, because now she knows. This man doesn't just want love. He demands respect. And he's willing to walk alone until he gets both. Words eventually lose their power when they are thrown into a void that only echoes back indifference. You could write the longest message, explain yourself in perfect clarity, pour your heart out in hopes she'll finally understand your pain. And yet, if she's in a state of contempt, she won't hear a thing. Not really. She may nod, smirk, pretend to listen, but her heart's already checked out, convinced of its own superiority. In that moment, she isn't with you. She's above you. Talking becomes begging. Explaining becomes pleading. And every word you speak becomes another brick in the wall of her indifference. That's when you need to realize the most powerful move isn't to speak louder, argue harder, or try to make her feel what she clearly doesn't anymore. The most powerful move is silence. Silence is where your strength lives when words become useless. It is not the silence of weakness or surrender, but the silence of discipline, clarity, and inner control. It's the silence of a man who is done trying to convince someone of his worth. When she's been weaponizing your emotions, when she's been pressing your buttons to see if she still owns space inside your head, your silence tells her she no longer does. And that silence, if held correctly, becomes louder than any argument you could ever offer, because it forces her to sit with herself. Without your reactions, she's left with nothing but the weight of her own behavior. This is what most men never understand. She expects you to respond. She expects you to blow up, explain yourself, come running back, apologize for standing up for yourself. It's part of the game. A push-pull dynamic she controls through emotion. And the moment you participate, by arguing, justifying, or chasing, she wins because she's not trying to solve the problem, she's trying to feel power. But when you stop responding, when you step back and go completely silent, not passive, aggressive, not cold and bitter, just absolutely unavailable, something inside her shifts. She starts to feel the void, not immediately and not in the way you might want, but subtly, like a missing beat in the rhythm she's grown used to. Now she begins to question, not because you tried to convince her of anything, but because you're no longer giving her what she's used to, access to your mind, your time, your emotional energy. That's what silence does. It pulls back the curtains and shows her what life looks like without your presence, your attention, your effort. And the longer you hold that silence, the more undeniable your value becomes. Suddenly, the things she once rolled her eyes at start to look different. The consistency, the loyalty, the way you showed up. All the things she took for granted now sit in sharp contrast to the emptiness she feels in your absence. But this silence is not a tactic. It's not a manipulation tool. It must come from a place of self-respect. You don't go silent to punish her. You go silent to protect yourself. You retreat not because you're afraid, but because you're done fighting for someone who's forgotten how to treat you. And in that stillness, you begin to rediscover the man you were before her contempt made you doubt yourself. You get clear. You get strong. You stop living on edge, constantly reacting, and you start leading your life again. And that calm detachment, the kind that cannot be faked, becomes your power. She'll feel it. She'll start to wonder where you went. She'll test the waters with a vague message, a random, just thinking of you. Something that's designed to see if the old you still exists, the one who would rush back at the slightest sign of hope. But this time you're different. You've tasted peace. You've touched that inner silence. And you're not so quick to surrender it just because she's suddenly interested again. That shift in energy speaks volumes. It tells her, you lost access, not because I stopped loving, but because I started respecting myself more. There's a brutal elegance in silence. It reveals what words can't, and when used from a place of true masculine stillness, not coldness, but clarity, it becomes the mirror she can't look away from. The silence reflects her behavior back to her. It forces her to see the contrast between the man who once begged and the man who now simply doesn't respond. That's when the regret begins, not because you forced it, but because you withdrew everything she once underestimated. And in that absence, she meets the truth. You were never weak. You were never too emotional. You were never the problem. You were just too available. And now that you're not, Your absence screams what your words never could. There comes a moment when a man must choose between being liked and being respected. And if he keeps choosing to be liked, if he keeps choosing comfort over confrontation, harmony over honesty, he will slowly become invisible in the eyes of the very woman he wants to impress. That's the truth most men don't want to face. You can't negotiate your way into respect. You can't bargain with your self-worth. You can't trade your masculinity for temporary affection and expect her to see you as a leader, a protector, or someone worth following. The moment you put her needs above your values, the moment you ignore your instincts to preserve the relationship, you lose a piece of your essence. You become agreeable, compliant, predictable, and eventually disposable. She may not say it aloud, but she senses it. She senses when you start tiptoeing around her moods, when your voice softens, not from kindness, but from fear, when your eyes scan hers not out of connection, but out of anxiety. You're always asking, is this okay? Are you upset? Did I do something wrong? That's not strength. That's not leadership. That's survival mode, and no woman, no matter how modern, wants to follow a man who lives in survival mode. She wants to feel like you can carry weight, not just financial, but emotional. She wants to feel your presence not as a question mark, but as an exclamation point. But how can she trust your leadership if you're always looking to her for direction? This is where most men crumble. They become addicted to emotional negotiation. They walk into every conversation with one silent hope. Please don't leave me. Please love me again. Please see me. And so they compromise, not once, but constantly. They tolerate things they once swore they never would. They accept disrespect, then call it patience. They swallow contempt, then call it emotional maturity. They show up again and again, trying to fix it, not realizing that every time they do, they reinforce her belief that she's more valuable than him, because that's what this dynamic becomes, an unspoken hierarchy. She's the judge, the prize, the gatekeeper of affection, and he's just the applicant, hoping to be chosen. But what if he stopped? What if he woke up one morning and decided that he no longer needed to be chosen, that he was the one who gets to choose who has access to him, that he wouldn't give an inch of himself to someone who looked down on him, that he wouldn't explain or plead or perform anymore? What if he simply embodied self-respect, not in words, not in lectures, but in action? The woman who once dismissed him, who once rolled her eyes at his needs, who once laughed at his boundaries, she wouldn't know what to do. Because contempt relies on your cooperation. She can't continue playing that role if you step out of yours. When you stop explaining yourself, when you stop asking for understanding, when you stop trying to emotionally negotiate your way into her affection, you become something entirely different. You become a man with options, not because you chase other women, but because you're no longer emotionally tethered to someone who devalues you. That is rare, that is dangerous, that is magnetic, and she'll feel it, not because you told her, but because she can sense that you've shifted. Your silence is different, your presence feels heavier. Your absence feels colder. You're not angry. You're just unavailable emotionally, spiritually, mentally. You've stopped asking, what do I need to do to make this work? And started asking, is this even worthy of me anymore? And that right there is the moment she starts to regret it. Regret the smirks, regret the eye rolls, regret the way she once talked down to a man who would have done anything for her. Regret, not because you shamed her, but because you outgrew her. She'll replay the moments, the arguments, the times you asked for basic respect and she dismissed you. She'll remember how she ignored your pain, how she weaponized your vulnerability, how she made you feel small, and now you don't even flinch. Now you don't even respond. You walk through life like a man who knows exactly who he is and what he deserves. That's the man she never expected you to become. That's the man who can't be guilt tripped, manipulated, or emotionally seduced back into the cage of self-negotiation. Because now you've made the choice, you've chosen self-respect over her validation, and in doing so, you've become a man she can't control, can't predict, and can't replace. A man who no longer begs to be seen, because he sees himself. A man who no longer asks to be valued, because he carries value in his posture, in his silence, in his decision to never again shrink himself just to keep the peace with someone who forgot how to love him right. And that's the moment the tables turn, not because you played a game, but because you chose to rise. You no longer live for her approval, because you've already claimed your own. You no longer need her to see your worth, because you've stopped giving discounts on your value. And in your absence, she begins to feel the weight of everything she took for granted. The man who stayed, who cared, who tried. Now she's left with silence and a memory. You're no longer the man who begs. You're the man she lost. And that regret, it echoes louder than any apology ever could.